Have you ever wondered why China is considered a threat by many countries? Well, the countries that share borders with China perceive it as a territorial threat, while those that are outside its proximity are alarmed by its aggressiveness and subversion of diplomacy with curbed democracy at home. But the biggest focus for China is on the waters. This leads to a very important point where its policy over the Pacific Ocean, Indian Ocean and Indo-Pacific needs a close examination, and its recent actions have possible repercussions for India. Namaste and welcome to TFI Post. I'm your host Polish Gupta. Let's begin. As per recent reports, after conducting ocean bed mapping in the Indian Ocean for almost 4 months, the Chinese research and survey ship Yang Shi You 760 crossed the Malacca Straits on April 13th. According to the marine traffic website, the vessel is currently situated near the coast of Singapore and it is en route to the port of Zhangjiang in China, having restocked its supplies at the Indonesian port of Balikpapan. This is the same vessel that renamed 19 seabed features in the Indian Ocean near Djibouti, Oman and Madagascar in Africa, some 2000 km away from the Indian territory. The vessel was primarily in the Indian Ocean in search of alternate routes to the Indian Ocean. Actually, the most prominent sea route to the Indian Ocean from Pacific is through the Malacca Straits. China is the biggest investor in Africa and it is basically dependent on African resources such as minerals among other raw materials. Apart from that, petroleum and energy imports from China also pass through the same route. And that is why it eyes the Indian Ocean for increased influence. As far as the Lombok or Ombay Straits are concerned, it would be more appropriate to leave the trade factor for a moment and understand its naval importance. Malacca Strait and South China Sea are crucial for China, but there is one limitation. Due to depth issues, submarines have to surface while passing through them. This raises concerns for the Chinese Navy. The Chinese Navy, which is the biggest naval force in the world, is continuously expanding its reach all over the world. It has been almost a decade since China began looking for an alternate route. In 2003, then Chinese President Hu Jintao described China's condition in Malacca as the Malacca Dilemma, referring to the lack of alternatives and vulnerability to a naval blockade. It means that in case of conflict, whatever the naval might of China, the Malacca Strait could be blocked for naval activities. So sea line of communication remain a prime issue for China. In that very scenario, deteriorating relationship with India could also worsen the Chinese dilemma. As trade from Africa and Middle East passes through the Indian Ocean, it is the only far-flung territory in the region during any conflict. For that purpose, China needs an alternative route that should be distant from Indian territory and near its South China part. Such alternate routes are the Lombok and Ombay-Water Straits of Indonesia. Now, if Lombok and Ombay-Water Straits become operational for China, it will give Chinese nuclear submarines a path to maneuver in the Indian Ocean without giving up its position. It can easily patrol the Indo-Pacific and Indian Oceans. And as far as the Chinese aggressive diplomacy record shows, the security of Chinese interest is just a phase. In reality, it is the offensive move to spy on India's maritime security so that in case of any conflict, it has a front against India. For India, it is an alarming development. Lombok and Ombay Straits are far south from the Malacca and Sunda Straits, and so have fewer ramifications for India during a non-engaging situation, except for the submarine spying activity. To counter that, India needs to bolster its economic as well as bilateral ties with Indonesia. Along with that, it is important to understand that the aforesaid straits are closer to Australia. This implies that Australia too must be cautioned by this move, as China has already tried to balance the geopolitical equations in that region through the Solomon Islands, a not so friendly country to Australia. So for India, there are many implications and India needs to take measures accordingly. First of all, India needs to get out of the mindset that it has to look after its own exclusive economic zone, EEZ. Instead, it has to go beyond the continental shelf. When China can cross the South China Sea to enter the Indian Ocean, why does India never go beyond its EEZ? Secondly, the US and UK negotiated on supplying nuclear-powered submarines to Australia under the AUKUS framework, with a prime motive to counter potential Chinese aggression in maritime zones in the Pacific and Indo-Pacific. This AUKUS group is desperately looking for a partnership with various actors in the Indo-Pacific that align with their ideas of a free and open Indo-Pacific. In line with that, Pillar 2 of AUKUS focuses on advanced capabilities like emerging defense technologies, artificial intelligence, and quantum computing. The AUKUS group is keen on a partnership with India under the Pillar 2 framework. So with recent developments, it is crucial for India to develop healthy cooperation with AUKUS or at least with Australia. Lastly, with a shift in the orientation of NATO, the organization is pivoting towards the Indo-Pacific, which evidently shows that it is more concerned about China. The current European problems have pulled NATO towards its earlier stance, but with modern-day geopolitical realities, NATO has acknowledged the Chinese threat to protect the bloc's interest along with maintenance of the bloc's relevance. To that extent, NATO has approached India, seeing New Delhi as a potential actor in the region. And as reports suggested that the talks were healthy, India may cooperate with NATO on various frameworks without being an official ally. Apart from that, the G7 and G20 must be collectively used to discuss rising Chinese clout in the Indo-Pacific and Indian Ocean. New Delhi has always carved out a way through the uncertainties it has faced. This time, it is an alarming situation. Before it gets worse, the top leadership has to make measures to counter such tactics from China.